Welcome back to Trinidad and Tobago. I'm Hema Ramkisoon. Thanks so much for staying with us. And we're coming to you from the beautiful Hyatt Regency Hotel. We're out on the waterfront. And yes, it is a big day in Trinidad and Tobago. October 1st, Budget Day. Don't forget, CNC3 will be bringing you all of the latest. We're continuing to highlight all of the issues affecting life in Trinidad and Tobago. Ian Narine is joining us on set. Ian, in addition to being one of the key personalities in the world of finance, he's also one of the writers in the Business Guardian. Ian, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, good morning.
It's a big day. All of the finance sector, all of the Trinidad and Tobago really, is looking at Larry Hawaii today at 1:13. You know, this morning we had the former Minister of Finance on set with us. We also had the Minister of Planning and Sustainable Development. What are you hoping to hear today? And if that is not included, would you consider the budget to be a failure?
The biggest issue that has been facing Trinidad and Tobago over the last number of years has really been the extent of the transfers and subsidies that have been taking place. To some extent, it is necessary on account of the fact that we need to have some measure of a social safety net. But I think we have gone beyond that. And really and truly, in a deficit budget, as we have had for the last 3-4 years, I would definitely like to see how the minister intends to rationalize this program to get value for money, to make sure that it is properly implemented so that wherever it is targeted at, it actually reaches that target and that group.
How do you determine success? You know, public sector spending is so different to private sector when there are a number of persons to account to, there are a number of persons that will call the directors to account. Right. Yet we seem to, never really achieve our expected targets. There's always a huge variance as to what is expected, what is done, static and flexible. But looking at...
Well, just listening to the minister speak previously, I mean, there can be many definitions of implementation and definitions of success. Like, for example, when we were speaking about the PSIP, and basically that 95% of the money that was allocated was spent, is that that can be one measure of success? How it was spent and what it was spent on, it can also be factors in terms of determining what is success. So that, like I said, there are many different definitions, and you choose one that suits you for all intents and purposes. But there's also a balance that needs to be had, because there is the expenditure that have been indicated that is necessary in order to create and provide for that social safety net. But there's also expenditure that is necessary for growth.
Looking at the possibility of growth, there is a prediction of 1.3% growth rate. Cutting expenditure, boosting revenue, the international landscape is changing as it relates to oil and natural gas. A number of new players are on stream. We've made some discoveries, but we won't see the benefits of that within the distant future, probably a 10-year period we're looking at. How is the minister going to find that balance, and is enough being done to return a balanced budget? Well,
the thing is, I mean, we've spoken about this casually, and I think even the minister mentioned it, that there's some initiatives in place, and that is with regard to the issue of tax collection. I think it was Minister Dukran in his very first budget that indicated to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, if everybody pays the taxes that are owed to the country, there would be no deficit. In other words, you'd be able to bridge that gap of $7 billion. So when we talk about the revenue side of the equation, that is, for all intents and purposes, your lowest hanging fruit, because it is stuff that currently exists within the economy right now. Granted that, with an economic slowdown, you would have less activity, therefore you may have less profitability amongst companies, you may have less unemployment, you may have, less transactional activity, so in terms of the collection of VAT. That is granted. But in terms of the lowest hanging revenue generator for the country, really and truly, it is about making sure that we close the loopholes and so on that are associated with tax collection. The minister has indicated that they are doing that. I think more needs to be done.
Asikuda, BIR, the mechanisms for collection, VAT has now been removed. The minister clarified and said we have to take the politics out of it. But, there are a number of concerns that have been expressed in articles today. One, now that you're continuing to remove these items and put them on the zero-rated list, do we have the mechanisms in place to ensure that there's no abuse of the system? Right, and
you look at it, how was the income tax treated? We treated income tax by removing a number of the allowances, so you just have a personal allowance. For all intents and purposes, and we've simplified that tax structure in order to improve collections. Now, with regard to VAT, we're actually going the other way, in that you started off with 15% VAT on most items, and gradually successive administrations have over time started to make increasing number of exceptions. it means then that the framework for policing these things, you've always had an issue of ensuring that what needs to be collected is collected, what needs to be charged is charged. So that the more zero-rated items you introduce, the more loopholes that you introduce. So really and truly, you're saying one thing with regard to the income tax, you're moving the other way with regard to the VAT.
Looking at the challenges facing the minister this morning, obviously the budget is final. What part are you really and truly hoping that you will not see in the budget?
Not see. I think the biggest issue for the population, I think what is causing the most anxiety is what is really as it relates to the fuel subsidy.
Right.
There's been a lot of talk about the removal of or a reduction of. Clearly, something is required along those lines. Big issue is how do we go about doing it? And I think that really is what will capture my greatest interest in relation.
Do you think we can, Ian, are we a population after 50 years of independence, can we really accept the government removing the fuel subsidy? While it has been proven that really and truly it's normally the rich that benefit the most from, or let me say the upper class or the upper echelons of society that benefit the most from this subsidy, do you think that we understand, we are mature enough as a nation to say, okay, I understand that we can't continue to live off the fat of the land?
Right, so that's the first point. Broad subsidies in and of themselves are ineffective.
Right.
Right? Gate, for all intents and purposes, is a subsidy. And it has proven to be ineffective because there are people who can't afford. And therefore, a blanket subsidy, for all intents and purposes, is ineffective. So the question then becomes, how do you introduce this and how do you manage this? The big issue for the country is not so much what the price of gasoline should be. The real issue, I think, is how do we move our thinking towards a variable price of gasoline, because that is in fact what obtains in the rest of the world. Oil prices move up and down, and with that gasoline prices move up and down. So if it is all we're doing is moving a price from $4 to $5 and from $1.50 to $2.50, then we have been achieving little. What we need to do is to get the country thinking and understanding that as oil prices move, the price of gasoline will move. We need to budget accordingly, adjust our behavior accordingly, depending on variable pricing.
What do you think should receive the biggest allocation from the budget? Last year it was education, I think. It's almost a toss-up between education, works and infrastructure, the big ministries.
Right.
But this year there's speculation that food production may actually receive a significant chunk of the budget.
Right. I mean, in terms of answering the question specifically, the biggest chunk would probably go to national security. I think it was 4.1 billion last year. Right. It was around the same year before that, and I think we've been constantly around that level. I don't see that changing given the issues with regard to crime in the society. Food production, yes. The question then becomes what and how. We've spoken about mega farms across successive administrations. What are those things supposed to produce? Are we dealing with local consumption or are we dealing with export? Traditionally, our agriculture has been for export. Are we going to be making a paradigm shift in that regard? Is it agriculture as it relates to job creation? How do you do that when we are boasting of an unemployment rate that is falling below 5%? And therefore, if you ask anybody in the private sector, especially among small businesses who are looking to hire people, they tell you that they can't find people. Right. So where is the labor going to come from for agriculture? If that labor is going to be substitution from CPEP, then how do you make that transition? So there are a number of issues. It's not just a question of allocating money to a sector. We really need to get behind that in terms of what those details.
Do you think that the Minister of Finance is up to the challenge? A number of expectations have been hinged on him and his successes as a banker. Now, if we had to look at the way that or the problems that he's faced in the economy, also political pressure, it obviously can't be business as usual for Minister Hawaii. It's not FCB anymore.
Right.
What are the major things that he really must do and some of the considerations he must put into place?
I mean, being up to the challenge, I think he is. The real question for him, and I think it came out on Saturday, is being able to mix the technical background that he clearly and obviously has with the politics.
I think none became more evident to me at no other time that he is not a politician than on Saturday at that rally.
Correct. He is not a politician, and therefore, but the question then, does he have the political savvy to, as he would have had to use in a corporate boardroom, to win and get the thinking aligned to what he sets out and what he wants to achieve?
Looking at the challenges facing the economy, growth remains a major issue. Where we're looking to achieve this growth, the competitive index continues to paint a very grim picture, and a number of the factors leading to that index is the lack of trust in the government, lack of transparency, lack of accountability. Yet we see this morning that we're going to go through construction, housing, national security. to continue to boost employment and continue to boost activity. Some will say that these are antiquated methods and that we should be a little more innovative as we attempt to be a knowledge-based society.
Right. So let's start with the last
I know,
part.
I said a number of things.
Yes, let's start with the last part of the question. In terms of a knowledge-based society, that is something that takes time, and that is not something that is going to happen overnight. When we're dealing with improving our competitiveness, one of the key issues in that regard is productivity. And how do you engineer productivity? Productivity, there's supposed to be a natural link between productivity and GDP growth.
Right.
So if we're talking about our GDP has improved this year, but our productivity has come down, then there is something amiss in that. And so it's one thing to boast that we are now returning to growth and GDP is picking up. But if it is not linked to an increase in productivity, then you have an issue. You look at the rest of Asia, and if labor is producing more and GDP is growing, then you are on your way and your path towards becoming a more developed nation. If the GDP growth is coming from activities that are centralized within government, and the private sector and labor participation and labor productivity is not increasing, then those government activities are being funded by the energy sector. When that is done, you still have a problem.